Good morning.
Morning.
First, recognize Cindy and all the great work she does in the whole 2030 district, bringing us all together and working on these really important issues with transportation, energy, and water. So water is today. I'm just going to kind of frame what's going on. We're about 5 weeks out from the biggest day in the history of Northeast Ohio. The 50th anniversary of the last time our river burned. And really it's a celebration of progress over 50 years, and also for us 10 years since Mayor Jackson launched Sustainable Cleveland 2019. So I'm going to kind of maybe be the shortest of the speakers and really kind of just frame that, make sure you're aware of what's going on and how to plug in. So you can see our marketing team has come up with, Cleveland is on fire, the river not so much. So we'll be framing that throughout. Here's the logo. And that's the whole theme. We're celebrating our river and we're igniting our future. We're not done. Long story short, we have made great progress, but so much to do with regard to water. And we'll hear a lot about that today. And also, this is the last year of Sustainable Cleveland 2019. Also, spoiler, we're not done. It's probably just going to be called Sustainable Cleveland, period, after this year. But we're really celebrating also 10 years of progress, and again, sort of really identifying with the community what are those key priorities to work on over these next 2, 3, 4 years. So it's a lot this year going on with arts, events, again, driving action towards these milestones, celebrating people. We forget about that sometimes. It's our year of people for Sustainable Cleveland 2019, so there's going to be a lot this year in terms of recognizing those leaders in the community, those people who are just starting and really getting their feet wet, and again, beyond 2019. There's a website, go on there, you can ignore the rest of what I'm going to say, because it's pretty much a lot on there. Cuyahoga50.org is the site. This is really kind of the hub for all the stuff going on with regard to water this year, and especially with the anniversary. It's such a big deal, we couldn't do it in one day. So June 19th through the 23rd, 5 days of activity, 25 events over 5 days, all related to water. And again, the actual anniversary is on June 22nd. It's the actual 50th anniversary of the river. There's a long story here. I think many of you are probably familiar with it, but this is pretty much it. And if you can't see, I'll just read it quick. On the morning of June 22nd, 1969, a spark dropped from a train passing over the Cuyahoga River. And for the 13th documented time over the previous century, it caught fire. What followed changed Cleveland and really the country, really the world forever, in terms of the action that followed. Does anyone know, quick quiz, the year of the first river fire?
1868.
51.
Boom. God, you're a speaker, I love it. Isn't that 1868? I mean, these are all like stats. To me, that's the craziest of all the stats. It's like 30 years earlier, like Alexis de Tocqueville was going through the Great Lakes and was commenting how this was the most pristine, beautiful place he'd ever seen in his whole life, in all his travels. 30 years later, rivers are catching on fire. The level of industrialization in that time is just really hard to imagine. So yeah, 101 years of the river catching on fire. Of course, many rivers caught on fire in this country, but we became known for that. We took that one to the chin, but we also own that, and we'll talk a little bit about it. But again, just the brief history, right? The fire happened actually the year before that. Mayor Carl Stokes and others had already started working on water issues, water quality issues. They issued a huge bond issue in '68 to start dealing with this. But the fire happened. It was like page 8 or something of the local plain dealer. Again, not a big deal. This has happened before. But Mayor Stokes at the time said, no, not cool. Next day, he went down to the river, brought the media, and said this is unacceptable, not only for environmental issues, but for social issues. And he was really one of the first to connect environmental issues to human health and really equity issues. So we talk about environmental justice today. He was way ahead of his time in talking about that. And then also not just in the region, but also took that to Congress. Mayor Stokes, his brother, others went to Congress, said this is not acceptable. We can do a lot locally, but we need help. So the US EPA got created the next year, and in 1972, the Clean Water Act got formed. Again, other things are happening at that time, of course. We're building off a decade of environmental activism in the 60s. The Santa Barbara oil spill was another big event that really captured the nation's attention. But again, this fire in Cleveland was a catalytic moment for the movement. Some of the issues today, back then, right, it was really big, bad polluters. And in many ways, a much easier problem to tackle from a water quality perspective, because it's easier to regulate. Stop dumping stuff in the river can really go a long way, and then cleaning it up. Today, our issues are much more complex and really system-wide, ecosystem-wide. Things like plastic pollution. Plastic pollution, we have this Don't Break the Lake campaign. This is a huge problem. You hear about it in the oceans. It's a huge problem in the Great Lakes, and especially Lake Erie, which is the shallowest of the lakes, and also, of course, the biggest fisheries of all the Great Lakes. So we're working a lot on plastic pollution going forward. Algae blooms, as we know of, it's not just the Western Basin. That stuff can come over here. We've had some issues even near here. We have a much more resilient infrastructure to deal with it, but it's not something to ignore. Climate change, a couple of reports have come out recently to say, of course, it's a big deal globally, and specifically in Lake Erie. Really, if we don't address climate change, it's going to have a pretty dire future for our lake. Of course, we're facing a lot of rollbacks right now, or proposed rollbacks from the federal government and the current administration. So that's a threat. And of course, things like invasive species. So the work isn't done, but again, we have a lot to celebrate this year. I'm going to kind of go quickly into what's going on over these 5 days, just to give you a sense of all the partners who are coming together. Literally over 200 organizations coming together this year to celebrate water and to kind of build that future. So I'll go kind of quick. This is we're going to have a big event guide that's going to be everywhere in a couple of weeks, so you'll learn more then as well. But I'll just start June 19th. That is a Wednesday. We extinguish, you may have heard of this, the Extinguished Torch Fest. That's starting up at the headwaters with a Native American water blessing. And that's going to actually go 4 days along the length of the river, all the way to the mouth, going through Akron, going through Kent, going through the national park, etc., with arts and culture festivals throughout. A really interesting event that's going to be called Sacred River Walk. So Sharon Day, she's an Ojibwe elder from Minnesota. She's going to be leading a walk in silence from the headwaters, essentially carrying water from the headwaters all the way to the mouth, 100 miles, walking the whole way over 4 days. Anyone can join certain segments of that walk if you want. You don't have to walk the full 100 miles. But it's going to be, I think, a really powerful way to really mark the importance of water. So, and then I can talk a little bit later, but she's also going to speak at this event, this Pachachka, that night of the 20th. She's going to walk 100 miles, and then she's going to get in front of 2,000 people and speak. So it's just remarkable. Things like Wait Till Wednesday, if you've ever done that, University Circle, they're going to have a focused event on water. And then that night, on the east entrance of the Detroit Superior Bridge, quick show of hands if you've ever been on the subway level, the streetcar level of the bridge. Actually, good amount. So the one day a year it's going to be fully open is June 22nd, the anniversary. There's going to be a special preview night here, 8 p.m. to 11 on the east side. There's a special lighting exhibit from a group from the UK. So it should be just a really fun event. Moving on to June 20th, Brian's going to talk, I'm sure, about Erie Hack. No? Yeah. Okay. Like, oh my God, what's going to talk about? So we'll talk about that, but it's incredible. There's an event, a neo-soul jazz singer at the Music Box. This is for the Conservancy of the National Park. They're having a benefit. And then that night at Jacobs Pavilion, Pachachka, the whole idea, right, is 10 speakers at least. They get 20 slides, 20 seconds per slide, so about 7-minute presentations. 10 speakers globally on water, so about 4 or 5 globally, 4 or 5 locally. And it's going to be a pretty incredible night. We need everyone there because it's going to be free. But we have to fill Jacobs Pavilion, big place. So we hope to see you there. Moving on to the 21st, we got a lot more also building off of the Erie Hack, building more into policy stuff. So City Club is hosting their State of the Great Lakes. That's going to be at noon. That's also going to be free. We know we have Christine Todd Whitman, previous EPA administrator, to talk about the history of the EPA, but also priorities going forward, and a couple other speakers to be announced soon. The Lead Safe Home Summit. We all know lead is a big issue in Cleveland and Northeast Ohio. There's a lot of activity going on around that. Actually, that summit's going to be taking place that day, also at Convention Center with the City Club. River Rally, a national conference, water advocates. It's in Cleveland. Really cool. Why? Because of the anniversary. That's 4 days starting the 21st. And then Burning River Fest is moving to this weekend, so the 21st and the 22nd. All right, so moving on to the actual anniversary day, Saturday. The weather's going to be incredible. We have a lot going on, East Bank, West Bank, again, above the river with the bridge on the river, Wendy Park with Burning River Fest, etc. So just to highlight real quick, so Rivergate Park, number one there. Activities all day, really family-friendly affair, really focused on recreation and the power of what clean water can do for bringing that part of the economy to life and really that access for residents, right? So tons of stuff going on that day. Part of that is celebrating the Cuyahoga River Water Trail designation. I mean, I get officially designated then, but the state is actually going to designate the Cuyahoga River as a water trail, meaning it is accessible for people. So that's going to be going on really throughout the day. Nautica has a bunch of events. 4 Miles for Water, if you want to drink local, drink tap. Their race that morning is going to be happening. And then they're going to have a kind of arts and culture food fest all day at Jacobs Pavilion. Talked about the bridge is going to be open all day. Settlers Lane, the sewer district, is going to be having an event at 11 a.m. Really talking more about infrastructure. So recreation, but also infrastructure, water infrastructure, that importance. So that's going to be a press event. And also looks like the 4th and final stage of the towpath, there's going to be a groundbreaking for that also that day. Number 5 there is in Ohio City. If you know Riverview, the 2 CMHA towers right next door, we're turning, a lot of folks are helping turn this, what's been for 20 years a storage facility, into a welcome center for the community, for Riverview residents, and really moving into Irishtown Bend, and the Irishtown Bend project. So that's going to be a really cool first kind of implemented project, I'd say, for the whole Irishtown Bend project. So they're going to have a welcome there. Of course, Coast Guard Station with Burning River Fest. And then at night, a lighted boat parade. So if you have a pleasure boat, light up, get on the river. I think there's going to be a big freighter lit up as well to celebrate, of course, industry as well, sharing the river with recreation. And if that's not enough, the Gold Cup is that day, First Energy Stadium. There's an Indians home game, there's a yoga fest, blah, blah, blah. There's tons of things. So you should just mark off your whole weekend and tell all your friends to come. And then finally, the 23rd is North Coast Harbor. So it's not just the river, it's the lake. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Great Lakes Science Center, going to be doing some great things. The Science Center just announced, with support from ArcelorMittal, it's going to be free that whole day, which we're excited about. There's going to be a beach cleanup in the morning. You have a big party, you got to clean up. And then Rock Hall is having a couple bands on stage. Destination Cleveland's been a great partner. They have this Visit Me in CLE weekend. It's that weekend. The whole idea is they're encouraging all of Northeast Ohio, bring your friends locally, but also from out of town to enjoy Cleveland and all the cool stuff going on. We're tracking news. We're already in a lot of media, and I think the idea initially too was like the national media is going to be coming. This isn't just a local story. This is a national story. We're already starting to get hits from the AP, from CNN, Yahoo, etc. So we're really tracking all of the media as well. So that's all on the Cuyahoga 50 site. For this group also, this is more connected to Sustainable Cleveland 2019, I'd say, than the Cuyahoga 50 piece. But part of this year, we all really want to celebrate business and all the great stuff businesses locally in Northeast Ohio have done over the last 10 years. So we're trying to get at least 150 case studies of organizations doing really cool stuff in some aspect of sustainability. We got 95 on there already. This is a partnership with CASE. So if you're doing some cool stuff, you know an organization that's doing some great stuff in sustainability, helping meet the UN Sustainable Development Goals, here's the site. It's aimtoflourish.com. or just Google aim to flourish Northeast Ohio and get involved. We'd love to be able to kind of celebrate all the great work that businesses are doing. And then finally, save the dates. October 16th is going to be our summit this year to again mark those 10 years, but also identify a few of those key areas we want to work on over the next few years. And the last thing I do want to mention, which we just found out last week, was that RTA is also going to be free on June 22nd for the whole system. So we're talking about access and equity, also parking issues. The whole system is going to be free, which is really exciting to get everyone engaged. That's my deal. So thank you.
So I'm the academic, so it's going to be a little more academic-ish. Surprise, surprise. Thank you very much for inviting me to this great event. All right, so Primer, Great Lakes, largest freshwater system on the planet. We always hear the stat, 20% of the world's unfrozen fresh surface water. But if you took the water in the lakes and spread it over North America, it would be 5 feet deep. That's how much water is in those lakes. 34 million people, most of whom rely on the lakes for their drinking water. And the reason that all these cities exist is where the rivers meet the lakes. You think about the major cities in the basin. So water is valuable to us for a number of reasons. Biology, of course, we need it, we are water. Consumption and use, which we've already heard about today, for various ecological services, including habitat, and then for love and experience. Every major religion holds water sacred, and we all love to get out there and do things on the lake, on the river. All right, so the traditional, here's the pictures that are now famous. As Matt mentioned, the river had burned 13 times. Every other river, major river with industry, had burned over the years. I think the largest fire on the Cuyahoga was in 1893. And it started in Kingsbury Run and ignited a whole lot of tanks at the Standard Oil facility on Kingsbury Run. But that's how we gained national attention, and that radical Richard Nixon forming the Environmental Protection Agency really was an important outcome of that. So this is what the river looked like in the 50s and 60s, and at least some of you in the room probably remember when things were a little worse, but I have a lot of students in their 20s, and they see pictures like this, they simply cannot believe it. They really have no way of orienting well to how things were. Lake Erie in the 1960s, oh my goodness, I grew up in western New York and lived near Dunkirk, New York for a while. We used to go to the beach, but you never went in the water. And there was a ring of dead fish about a foot high all the way around as the waves came in. So we played in the sand, basically, and it was kind of nasty. There's a hidden surprise in this picture, which I'll explain later. Okay, so how did all this change from the bad things? And I think what we're talking about is a story of restoration for these waters, and with the capacity for how these waters heal our cities as well. And I want to talk about, that's the Cuyahoga subwatersheds for the lower Cuyahoga. So it changed because we are part of these systems, a dynamic social ecological system. So I want to talk about shifts in governance, both at the local and super-local level, shifts in production, and then changes in our perception of what these waters meant. The social ecological system is how we manage ourselves interacting with the natural world. The natural world changes, we change in response, and vice versa. So this is a continual interactive process, emphasizing humans in nature, not nature as a backdrop. We are part of it, and we interact with it continually. Two other concepts that are important, I think, for understanding the change over time. The first is governance, which are all the institutional structures and processes through which people make change. People take action, policies, laws, organizations, all kinds of initiatives. And then the point being that these are adaptive They change over time to meet the needs of what people want, but also to meet the needs of the resource. The illustration, does this thing have a pointer? Yes. This illustration is something done by a former doctoral student of mine who did her dissertation on the Cuyahoga a couple years ago. The point being that by the time you look at local, regional, state, and federal levels or scales, and by the time you look at what people do about pollution control, restoring the river, and economic redevelopment, it's a pretty complicated landscape in terms of organizations. And they work together, their missions overlap, and this is kind of how the river has and the lakes have moved forward in terms of all of this energy, time spent, resources spent over many years. The way that people, lastly, the way that people think about all of that resource and how they can take action, then shapes what happens. So Matt already talked about Carl Stokes. He indeed did go down to the river the day after the fire that was covered. He's also an important person in our history because he was the first African American mayor of a major U.S. city. And that person, that person is Ben Stefanski, who was the city utilities director. So they went down to the river, had a press conference, and Matt already told you the story of then what happened with Carl and Lou Stokes. At the time that Cleveland voters approved a $100 million bond issue for river cleanup, the entire effort of the federal government was $180 million. So there had not been much that happened at the federal level. And after the fire, there was a campaign in Cleveland that kids started writing to the mayor, please fix our lake, please fix our river. So, kids wanted to go and play on the beach. You couldn't have done that at that time. So if we look a little above local, in terms of the Great Lakes, there's the point being, I won't go through great detail here, but the point being that over the years there's been creation of a set of treaties and agreements and policies and law, both the United States and Canada, that have really driven a lot of the changes in terms of regulation and in terms of gradually moving toward a more collaborative environment for addressing water quality issues. The first Boundary Waters Treaty that created the International Joint Commission was focused primarily on, well, we have this shared border, how are we going to manage those lakes? But a lot of it was on navigation and then lake levels. So, there's some locks and things on the lakes that they can regulate water levels. The Great Lakes Compact created the Great Lakes Commission. That is primarily a data gathering and collection and reporting organization that provides information to the governments in the basin. Water withdrawal is a huge issue in the lakes, and there are several policies and things put in place so that it requires approval before you can take out significant quantities of water out of the basin. And then lastly, in terms of water quality, it's been several iterations of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, and that's where remedial action plans came into effect as an outgrowth of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. And so over the years we've created a collaborative management system for the lakes, which has helped move things. So today, it's a governance network that is very adaptive, very complicated, many organizations. But for the Cuyahoga, for example, we have several organizations that have always had a very strong role. The Cuyahoga River Restoration, which used to be the community planning organization, and then the AOC committee, Area of Concern, the local committee, which is comprised of government, non-government, business, a whole set of stakeholders that meet and try to remove the Cuyahoga from this list of rivers that are really bad, right? And so delisting, getting off this list, is an important accomplishment, and the Cuyahoga River these folks have managed to delist several of the things so that today The fish in the Cuyahoga are no more harmful than the fish out of Lake Erie. I'll leave you with that one. But that's a big improvement. Like, that's opposed to the fish that had tumors and, all of that. Yeah. The last kind of change that I think is important to include here is the second to the last, a shift in production. So as we've already talked about, the history of the river is pretty important for industrial production in Cleveland and the Great Lakes. And interestingly, the Cuyahoga was never really a source of drinking water. So it became a place where industry existed, you couldn't get to it, it was not very attractive, so people kind of disconnected from that pretty early on in Cleveland. This is where I learned the 1868 number. But the other thing that was happening, of course, is the loss of industry out of North America, including Cleveland. So the city lost 60,000 manufacturing jobs between 1952 and 1969. And by 1990, only 23% of the city's workers held manufacturing jobs. And so a total of 140,000 manufacturing jobs had been lost, much because of automation. But then, of course, a heavy industry moved from this region to the south in the United States, and then to Japan, Korea, Brazil is a big steel country, and eventually China. So that change in the economy afforded a space for people to think a little bit differently about the river. That meant that people started talking differently about the river, and new kinds of information came up. There was a series of cartoons by Bill Roberts in the Cleveland Press during the 1960s that focused on the lake and the river. I think Matt had this slide. Oh, shoot, sorry. This is Cleveland Plain Dealer reporter Richard Ellers went down to the river, stuck his hand in the water, and there you go. That was pretty awful. We had the Time magazine coverage in '69, and then Earth Day. In 1970, 20 million people in this country protested throughout cities across the country, including in Cleveland. And so as the flats emptied out of a lot of manufacturing, and most Clevelanders didn't make their living in those industries, it created a little bit of psychological distance, and people said, well, what is this place going to be if it's not industrial jobs? So in a sense, there was a new meaning created for what that place is and what could happen. A couple things happened that really helped that along. In 1999, the County Planning Commission published the North Cuyahoga Valley Study, and our friend Jim Kostelik was instrumental in putting that together. In 2000, Steve Litt had a series in the Plain Dealer about the Forgotten Valley. It was a 5-part series on the river and its valley, and galvanized attention. Okay, we've made great progress, but we're not done yet, as Matt said. In 2004, the Planning Commission started its Cuyahoga Valley Initiative, which was a wonderful framework for the valley. Paul Alcinas, who was the director at the time, speared that. The Rocky Mountain Institute came in and worked with the Planning Commission for a number of years. And what they were really trying to make the case that, yes, the river is important for the economy, but we have to figure out which economy. Right? We don't have what we used to have. How do we move forward on that? So the role of the press was very important in drawing attention to the river and the valley, and helping people start thinking about what is it that we want to do with that space. So these changing values evolved into thinking about the river this way as well. And the other thing I'll add is locally, former Councilman Simperman was instrumental in shifting the organization that had been working on the flats and the river itself to include a broader spectrum of stakeholders. And that made a difference as well. So today we appreciate the presence of all kinds of businesses and industries on the river and the importance for the economy. So the way we value the resource shapes how we think about it, and it shapes what we're willing to do and what we're willing to work on. So now we're thinking about restored value to the river. Fish have come back, there's trails, there's new neighborhoods evolving down there, none of which would have happened if the river still was the way it was in the 1960s. Still some issues, but getting better. And here's the surprise, those pictures are actually from the 2000s, not from the 1960s. You guys all know that we've had some issues, particularly in the Western Basin, but Matt's right, those things can happen all across the lake. And so, you know, we now understand the zebra mussels changed the water itself to be clearer, so sunlight goes deeper in the lake. Nitrogen levels have changed because of the zebra mussels, and phosphorus from agriculture, and then other sources as well in the Central Basin, just provide a much better environment for these algal blooms to occur. I have no doubt we'll fix it if we're persistent, if we pay attention and assert the value. But I think the lesson for this is a huge dynamic system of inland seas, and we take it for granted. We cannot assume it will stay or continue to recover. It requires a lot of action and continued work. So I appreciate the chance to share a few things with you all, and that's it. That's me. Yeah, if anybody have questions, I'd be happy to. Yes, ma'am.
I love the way you talk about what precipitates psychological change or economic change, and while Matt's doing it, I'm curious to know if there's anything that you know or anything that's been studied about the role of the arts in creating that kind of change, specifically around how we think of water.
I know there's a lot of activities related to art for the whole celebration. That's not my area of expertise, but yes, I'm sure there's been a lot.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's been a huge focus this year is the arts, and what's so great is that the fire and water is such an easy theme to capture onto and integrate with existing programming in the arts. So from Cleveland Museum of Art, Natural History Museum, really down the line, there's like 20 different arts events going on this year related to water. So I don't have like the data, but I think we all intuitively know that it's a huge deal. So yeah, and on Coyote50.org there's a whole arts section, so I definitely encourage you to go on there and just see all the cool stuff.
It'd be interesting to have a PhD study that's like the governance structure across scale.
Yes.
To see what difference music makes or performing arts. Or
Right. Well, Dr. Samantha's work, she's at San Francisco State now, but her dissertation was about the meaning that people impart to these various types of resources, so I stole a few things from her. But we worked for 5 years together on the Cuyahoga and the Chagrin, and trying to understand how the importance of how people think about a resource was a wonderful thing to learn about. Not my bailiwick either. Yes, ma'am.
And can you tell us how long the Cuyahoga has been an area of concern and where we are in the process of having it delisted?
Sure. Well, the remedial action plans and areas of concern, 1985 was the first time that program came into being, and most of the AOCs were designated by 87. It was an interesting federal program because at the time everyone was concerned because there was no new money available, and what the Fed said was, no, you have to collaborate locally and put your resources together to figure out how to get these rivers delisted. So there's a list of about, 15 or 20 beneficial use impairments that every area of concern needs to address. The Cuyahoga has removed, I think, 3 or 4 of those beneficial use impairments and is very close to removing a few more of them. But I will say it's been a long process. There's only been 1 or 2 areas of concern in the entire 46 in the basin that have been completely delisted. So these are the rivers and harbors that have the longest history of industrial production, and a lot of the issues are sediments and just degradation of the waters because of land along the rivers themselves, as well as some watershed scale. So it's taken a long time, but I think the benefit of the remedial action program is it has driven that kind of local collaboration, which I think always is important for additional consequences. Gets agencies and organizations to work together better. And you see that here, and you see it in other cities as well. Yes, sir.
Can you comment on the Chicago River, that they actually reversed the river so that the pollution in the river went into the lake, and they didn't like that, so they reversed the river. Can you comment on, is there a contrast or something between them?
Bad idea. Yes, that happened a long time ago because all the pollution from human waste was flowing in the river into the lake, and they got their drinking water out of the lake. So instead of fixing that problem, they reversed the flow of the river. Yeah, a lot of crazy things have been done over the years. A good lesson for every major Great Lakes city has been that you take your drinking water higher up in the watershed than where the waste goes. But they did not take that to heart, I guess. I think it's, well, it just seems odd. You know, I'm all for expediency, I suppose, but I think the point is to restore the natural function of these systems as best we can figure out what that is, and sort of let them heal. That was a major change, certainly, in how the system works.
Apparently they had litigation, cities downstream, and
Sure.
eventually goes into the Mississippi.
Yes, yes. It's really a challenge to connect river systems that aren't naturally connected, because you set up an incredible opportunity for invasive species and waste to move in ways that you almost can't anticipate what might happen. So I would advise it. Yes?
I used to hear a lot about Asian carp.
Yes.
I haven't heard so much about that lately. What's the status of that?
Closer to the problem point, I guess. The Chicago River had an electric barrier they put up there, right? I don't know, Matt, you might know more, but my understanding is there hasn't been that much done to really stop it, and they're finding DNA evidence in more and more places, especially in the Lake Erie Basin. So we're probably not really going to head it off with the level of effort right now. And it will be just as devastating as zebra mussels, probably, in terms of our friends who do fishing on the lake, right? It will not be good. But there's hundreds of invasive species in the Great Lakes. It's almost impossible to stop all of them, but that one's going to be big. Yeah. Can I promote my event?
Of course, please
Smoke
do.
on the Water. Those of you who are old enough, yes, it's a reference to that famous song. Those of you who aren't, you'll have to look it up. Next week on Thursday, we have an event at the Levin College. John Hardy, who's a scholar who's worked on the Great Lakes for over 30 years, and a panel of folks, including Steve Litt, will talk about restoration of many Great Lakes rivers, and then focus on the Cuyahoga. So there's flyers out there, and it's on our website. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, good morning. I'm, as mentioned, Brian Stubbs, Cleveland Water Alliance. I want to get a little bit first into kind of the who we are, what we do, and then we do a lot of different things, but I'm going to focus on a particular project we have ongoing now around the harmful algal bloom early warning system, because that seems to fit the theme, but I just wanted to make the little kind of pre-comment to say there's a lot of things I'm not going to get into that we do. So, you know, I encourage everybody to sign up for our email list and our newsletter and all that kind of good stuff, so you can get an idea of how deep it goes. So our organization, Economic Development Through the Lens of Water, Water Technology, Water Innovation, we launched in earnest just a little over 5 years ago, but certainly a decade's worth of effort by some just beautiful leaders within this community, both from the civic and the corporate perspective. Our founding board chair, Jenny Griselli Brown, kind of being that, we call her the godmother of the organization. At our core, though, is to leverage technology to drive economic development and spark innovation around water in Cleveland and beyond. And what's really important for us is we think we can change, and we've got data that says we are starting to change this particular economy by investing in our water ecosystem to spur research, innovation, and technology. We also spend a lot of time on launching, retaining, growing, and attracting companies to grow an industry based on the abundance of water. So, to that point, just a few quick data points before we get into this. Here in Cuyahoga County, 929 net new jobs created between 2014 and 2016. And I highlight that because we put a lot of resources into other areas: aerospace, advanced manufacturing, energy, and biohealth. Water outpaced all of those combined during that time period for Cuyahoga County. So there's a robust economy built around what we call the blue economy. Blue economy, if it's wet, it's blue. So we're working with everybody from the ecological restoration company to a coastal resilience company to somebody working behind the walls of a building or a home. So a case like that would be somebody like Odie, where we're working on the concept or idea of using acoustic telemetry to detect a leak in a home before it actually happens, and if that leak is detected, shutting off their system, sending out a multiple bid to 3 service providers, and you get a text on that, all kind of instantaneous. So there's a lot of things going on there. We've also started seeing a significant increase in R&D. That's really key. So one of the first things we did, we have a partnership with NASA and NASA Glenn, is we had NASA here in Cleveland identified as the water lead of the 9 NASA centers. Why did we do that? Well, if a NASA center is known for a particular expertise, we see a radical increase in research and development dollars from a federal level coming into about 150 circumference radius of that particular NASA center. So we're seeing these really impactful job creation, R&D creation. We think that this is a more sensible way of building our local economy. You're going to hear me talk a lot about cluster and a cluster strategy. What we're doing is building on the natural assets. If not but for that 1969 event, would we have almost 200 companies in this area working in water? Well, we'd have some, but we certainly wouldn't have 200. So we have this really interesting ecosystem. Another key component to this from an economic standpoint, and I'll get into the fun stuff, is these jobs and their salaries. First of all, we need everything. We're about to have about 50% of our staff from a water utility perspective retired. So we've got a lot of jobs to fill there, but our jobs are ranging between $60,000 and over $100,000. That's real, way above the an Amazon fulfillment center, and we can train and we can teach people. So I'll get a little bit off my soapbox now to say, is this cutting out? All right. How do we do this in kind of the categories? First, research and technology and innovation. I'm going to get into, the Smart Lake, and that's what a lot of people know us for right now is, creating the first smart Great Lake of the 5 Great Lakes, the first smart lake at scale anywhere in the world. Matt mentioned a moment ago the Erie Hack Innovation Challenges. We launch a lot of open source, big innovation challenges, and that's really been a driver. I'll get into that in a minute. But in this case, $100,000 currently at play right now in Erie Hack 2.0 on June 20th. And of course, supporting partner-led initiatives. So that's the first category. The second, is the cluster strategy. How do we work with industry to grow this? How do we attract companies here? Based on our deep research. We have incredible research institutions here. They do a lot in water. We don't fully take advantage of that. Our companies are interested in having access to that kind of thinking. Facilitate P3s and getting Cleveland and Northeast Ohio known for this expertise. So, to that point, I sit on several national boards, as well as I chair this effort for the Water Environment Federation for water innovation clusters. So that's gotten the attention where we have partnerships with folks like the Water Alliance in the Netherlands, with Israel, with Singapore. They're looking at us, especially around this idea and this concept of smart and connected systems as it relates to harmful algal blooms, as being the world leader in this. So now a whole other component to the industry there. And then, of course, the third kind of vertical that we work in, which is more of the education policy. So we are not an environmental group. We have really good environmental policy partners. But when we talk about policy, we talk about how can we impact policy around best available technology for ecological monitoring. So a great case of that is what's going on right now with the H2 Ohio Fund here in Ohio, where we're looking at potentially $90 million a year going into water quality, starting with the Western Basin and the harmful algal bloom and the nutrient challenges. The question there is, you're just throwing money at what? What are you measuring? How are you measuring it? How do you know if mitigation's being impactful? So we're working that angle through the lens of policy. There must be monitoring, and it must be best available technology for monitoring as a policy piece. So when we say policy, that's what we're talking about. And I'm almost done with the boring part, I promise. I talked a lot about clusters. So the cluster strategy came out of Harvard, Porter, and it really takes advantage of our natural assets here. It's a really intelligent way to grow a local economy. It's not prescriptive, it's not traditional. It's something outside the United States is ingrained. The EU has it as cluster strategies as part of their constitution. Singapore works with this. Australia works with this concept. So it's starting to take on in the US, but you'll see the triple helix model that is the cluster. It's academic research, industry, and government and utilities. So you can see there all the academic institutions we work with. That's growing quarterly. Besides our core institutions here, we were just brought into what's known as SIGLR, or the Co-op of Integrated Great Lakes Research. That's $20 million a year over 5 years to work with research institutions throughout the entirety of the Great Lakes. We were brought in to work with how do we get the research going on at these institutions into the marketplace, how to work with industry to get that new technology, those things that are in the lab, out of the lab. Of course, industry and business is key. You'll see names on there that you all recognize. Companies like Odie have been hugely important in driving this blue economy conversation. Our footprint has been growing. We like to say we're the Cleveland Water Alliance. We're based in Cleveland, but goodness, we're all over Ohio, but we're also deeply into Michigan and Western New York. Great case and example of that is YSI out of Yellow Springs, Ohio, one of the world's leaders in optical sensors. Little manufacturer there, 200 employees, $20,000 a pop for one of these optical sensors, and they export these all over the place. So we're working with companies like that, as well as a lot of our core companies here. I mentioned Odie, Eaton, Connecticut would be another good example. And then, of course, government and infrastructure. So we're working with, from that standpoint, it always starts for me with utilities. So our founders were Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, Cleveland Water. At this point, we're working with about 20 different utilities, and we work with them in a lot of different ways. The story I have with this one, which is at the time, the gentleman who was running the sewer district, Julius Chosh, when I was considering taking this position and doing the normal board, song and dance, he grabbed me by the jacket and he's like, if you do this, you have to figure out how to help us innovate. Utilities, government agencies, they tend to not innovate, they tend to be a little stale, but it was this cultural openness to saying, we've got to do something different. And that was a really good indicator for me. Likewise, we have relationships and partnerships with NOAA, nationally, and various programs there, and then certainly I mentioned with NASA, with ODNR here in Ohio is probably our strongest partner in terms of the state of Ohio, where they're actually funding 2 of our PhD biomimicry students in partnership with the University of Akron and Biohabitats. So that gives you a little bit kind of like the who, the what, the how, the why in terms of what we're building here in Northeast Ohio that's being recognized not only regionally in the Great Lakes, but nationally and internationally. So, Cindy asked me to talk about harmful algal blooms, and I can't talk about harmful algal blooms without talking about our path to a smart lake. Not going to steal anybody's thunder, I promise, but 2014, Toledo's water system was shut down because of not nuisance algal bloom, but harmful algal blooms. What makes a harmful algal bloom harmful? Nobody from the front rows.
Liver toxins?
Yeah. So harmful algal bloom contains a cyanotoxin, neurotoxin, microcystin. And that's what got into Toledo's system in 2014 that shut their water system down for 2.5 days. What we're looking at as this problem continues to grow is big dollar cost. 1.5 billion in cost just for the 20 utilities. Those are like real costs that they're going to have to do to mitigate in terms of harmful algal blooms, treatment for cyanotoxin. That's not getting into recreation, tourism, fishing, branding hits. It's going to be significant dollars. That being said, Ohio, Michigan, and the province of Ontario have said, well, we've got to do something. And what we want to do is lower phosphorus loading into Lake Erie by 40% by 2025. That being said, based on what year and how are they getting that data, we just see a huge challenge around data and insufficient data. So since 2014, we haven't seen significant progress on this. We've seen a lot of talk, but not a lot of action, not a lot of return on the dollar spent. That's why we're so concerned right now about the 90 million going into this problem from the current governor. I mean, we applaud him for doing that, but it needs to be done right and be it correctly. So with that, never let a disaster not be turned into an opportunity. So that's what we've been working on with the Cleveland Water Alliance. The idea of the Smart Lake, a new breed of smart and connected infrastructure that enables intelligent regional water management by a cross-sector collaborative system of institutions and industries. So what does this mean? And I'm using the example of harmful algal blooms and nutrient. We're taking the same approach to the urban watershed, be it stormwater management, be it legacy contaminant management. But for this example, we're going to talk through the lens primarily around nutrient pollution and what we're building as a response. So, open water, deliver predictive warnings that mitigate direct community impacts. Evaluate and optimize nutrients, stormwater, and other mitigation efforts. Edge of field, how do we control nutrient runoff and deliver an ROI for the ag community? We don't want to vilify the ag community as part of this. So that's led us to being part of what's known as a harmful algal bloom early warning system. It's a partnership through the Great Lakes Observing System, Limited Tech, Ohio Sea Grant, us, and NOAA, primarily through something known as Integrated Ocean Observation System, which, it's really funny because everybody just calls it by its acronym, IOOS. The IOOS, what they funded us to do is $2.1 million to develop a resilient, robust early warning system. And we're using that as the first kind of, breaking the foundation of developing a smart lake. So what we're looking at is stabilizing and enhancing in-lake monitoring, data management, what we call DMAC, and also the online HAPS portal, turning that from something that's kind of stagnant and dead into something that's living and real. And look, in 2014, when Toledo went through the crisis, there was a lot of assets thrown out into the lake. It's what you do during an emergency. You just get things out there, you get things around the water intakes, you put little buoys around the water intakes, you put sensors in them that are measuring things like turbidity, blue-green algae, temperature, just so you can start to have an idea of what's going on with that water as it's coming through the intake. Not even getting to the point where, folks like us are looking at this from a holistic standpoint. We want to know everything about the lake in real time, all the time, from the top to the bottom. So we launched this last year. The current state of those assets. So right now we do use remote sensing and satellite technology. Primary source for that is NOAA. But that being said, we've got two companies that are doing fixed-wing remote sensing starting this summer, which we think is going to be a little better, allow us to get underneath clouds. If it's a cloudy day, satellite can't see through the clouds. Are moving forward our algorithms for being able to determine from space or from high altitude a harmful algal bloom from a non-harmful algal bloom, from concentrations of phosphorus, from concentrations of nitrogen and phosphorus up the watershed and potentially even on land is significant. But right now, this system's kind of dumb. And by dumb, I mean there's a guy at NOAA's lab in Ann Arbor, the Laurel Lab, who gets these images, kind of studies them, ingests them into an Excel sheet, spins out a map. From that map, puts that into a bulletin. Bulletin spun into a PDF and then emailed out, or once a week, or you can, talk to him and maybe get an earlier version of it. So not reactive and a lot of legacy components there. The second thing is graph samples and samples. That's something Dave does a lot. That's going to speak after me, but it's very important. But it's also takes a lot of time. If somebody's out and about doing a graph sample, taking that sample back to land, from land it's getting transported to a lab. From a lab, it's actually a day or two later potentially getting reviewed and looked at. From there, it gets inputted into an Excel file, and from there, somebody may use it as part of this, HABS bulletin that I mentioned earlier. So again, not super reactive. The one part of that, what we're starting to make progress on, is something there called the ESP. Right now, these are $400,000 wet labs in a can. I can do 20 tests for actual microsystem within these wet labs, but $400K, 20 tests, you got to bring it back out. It takes weeks to reload it. That's getting down in size and down in cost, so we hope to try a few more of those. But they're also dumb, other than we did put one in a little swimming torpedo at the end of last year, and hope to do that again this year. Then the third, where we've had more progress on getting a little bit smarter, are sondes. And those are, the buoys that you see around the water intakes. If you've been on Lake Erie, you see those buoys. Has anybody here ever texted a buoy?
I did.
Oh, I see 3 hands. Maybe we can, I see Savannah back there. Maybe we can give them that phone number later. You can text the buoy and it'll give you the real-time data off of that. So what these sondes are measuring depends on what we load them with, but it's the things I mentioned earlier. It can be turbidity. It can be blue-green algae, I'm blanking, but there's like 10 different things that we can load into these slots, but up to 5 slots per sonde. But the idea here is we can then use that data, which flies off of these in real time. By flying, meaning telemetry, cell, satellite. We're now getting into what's known as LoRaWAN, which is lower energy telemetry, to be able to get more and better data more quickly, more faster. So that's the current state. That's what we inherited over this last year and a half. So what we looked at starting last year is to develop a platform that demonstrates a flow of sensor data into actionable intelligence. So first of all, how can we improve sensors? How can we improve flying that data off the sensors? So we're working on that. We're working with the manufacturers on that. Getting better, more real-time raw data. And again, remember, we're doing this right now for harmful algal blooms. We're going to be doing the same thing, as an example, for E. coli here in Northeast Ohio, and in particular Euclid Beach. You don't have to wonder if it's a safe swimming day or not a safe swimming day. You don't have to wonder when was that test done. We can start getting into real time. So an improvement of raw data. Improvement of storage. Right now, all that data I've been mentioning doesn't really live anywhere. What you'll start to see here is a theme that you hear in smart and connected cities, but applying that to water. We now actually have started to develop where we can process, do large algorithm computations, and now we're starting to create visualization tools out of that data. We can now put that in a smarter, more quick way onto a set of web services. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to get to right there, actionable intelligence. So who cares about a harmful algal bloom early warning system? Well, let's start with those 20 drinking water utilities and the 8 million people that those utilities provide drinking water for. Human health, industry, a lot of people use that water. I think we're going to see more companies being concerned about reliability of water, and we'll be coming here. We better be ready for that so we can do it in a thoughtful, sustainable, holistic way. And the next thing is, and I mentioned this, we're now starting to build our whole system into the actual devices themselves. So right now, if I spend $20,000 on a sonde, it's plug and play. When I load it into a buoy out in the lake, it's going to automatically upload into this system. And of course, there's a cybersecurity component to this. So this is what we call a rapid prototype. We're going to be punching this out next month. It's been tested, we've been ingesting data, but we're now going to get into it in more of a robust way. So I'm not going to bore you with this, but you kind of get the idea of, we're taking that satellite data, which we're getting more of. We're getting the sonde data. We're getting all that data more real-time, more frequent. We're improving the ability to process that and to create what we call individual streams. What I'm really excited about here is when we start getting to a level of individual streams, we're then moving into where we can create data as a service model. So real simple, right now Cleveland Water has buoys by every one of their water intakes, but they don't have the staff to necessarily go out there, understand how to do maintenance, and they do require a lot of maintenance to fully understand the operations of these. So we want to take that away from them and say, look, we as this effort around the early warning system will service this for you, we'll own them, we're just going to give you the data, and you're just going to pay out of operating or service dollars instead of fixed costs. So the idea here is we can now start developing a lot more data as a service, a lot more actionable intelligence for whomever needs that as they need that. This will become very important as we get into stormwater and other urban components. So that's a little bit on the harmful algal bloom early warning system. What we're doing, again, as I mentioned, we're going live with the rapid prototype next month. We'll be deploying it all summer for field season. And then we'll be going back in over the winter and kind of tying up what we need to improve on, and then it will launch in earnest in 2020. So our process in the pathway to the smart lake and the pathway of building smart and connected systems around water, it starts with Erie Hack that Matt mentioned earlier. This is our Open Innovation Challenge. So we launched this about 2.5, 3 years ago. In the first round of it, 42 early stage solutions were developed. This is where we put $100,000 on the table. We identified kind of the core challenges regionally. We did that with NASA's creativity and innovation team. We brought in Detroit, we brought in Toledo, we brought in Erie, Pennsylvania, we brought in Windsor, Canada, and we brought in Buffalo. So we're not doing this solely from a Cleveland or an Ohio perspective. It's truly a basin-wide innovation agenda. So Erie Hack really exposed a lot of good opportunities. From that, we launched into our next innovations challenge called the Internet of H2O, where we got a lot more specific, and we actually had 5 pilot deployments in the Sandusky Bay that have figured into the rapid prototype. So this is just really kind of interesting, groundbreaking in some ways, analytics tools where they can actually get much more into the predictive and start giving us also better information in terms of mitigation or land actions on trying to keep nutrients where they need to be kept. And then into implementation, which is the harmful algal bloom warning system. So all that being said, if any of this is of interest to you, June 20th we'll have the final for this year. We do it every other year. Erie Hack, it'll be June 20th as part of the 50th anniversary. It'll be at Windows on the River. It'll run from 12 p.m. till 5:30 p.m. So we'll have the final 9 teams pitching. Should back up one notch. On June 5th, we'll have the semifinals co-branded with Sustainable Brands in Detroit. They've given us a whole entire afternoon in their big arena, so we're really excited about putting some of these technology solutions in front of, literally the top 200 companies in terms of sustainability worldwide that will be there. There, we'll have 18 teams. We'll get down to 9, maybe 8 here in Cleveland on June 20th. So June 20th, coming back to it that afternoon, all these teams will pitch. We've got some really good judges, which include the head of Connecticut, the head of ODI, the head of Xylem Analytics internationally. So it should be a lot of fun. there will be a reception as well, and then after the reception, everybody can go over to the PK event, which is about 20 steps away from where our event will be. So, kind of wrap up a little bit here by saying, the vision for the future, by having this framework around the Smart Lake, I think we've really created a platform for innovation and collaboration driven by Cleveland, but recognized nationally and internationally. It certainly is scalable, and it figures into a smart region strategy. So I'm sure some in this room are working on smart and connected systems, be it lighting, be it transportation, whatever it may be. This is just all part of one platform that we should all be plugging into. And one quick little side note on that, we just received a 3-year, $800K grant to run with a smart citizen science program. So we're even getting into how can we empower citizen science, but make it smart. So to that point, we're going to be working with blockchain technology on the nutrient management, trying to get Ohio to utilize something that has that public ledger and that public trust to it. So with that being said, we're the Cleveland Water Alliance. Any questions? I'm happy to answer them now. Thank you. Yeah.
So with the new changes with the combined overflow systems, and I know there's a lot of adaptation that's going in, especially in Toledo, Cleveland here as well. Are you starting to use some of this data to be able to see how that's implementing and if that's helping with the issues of the stormwater?
So you're talking about the storm separations, combined sewer overflow. So the background for those that don't know, our sewer systems were built that when it rains, our sewers and our rainwater are combined, and that sewage then just spills out into the lake and into the rivers. And almost every community that has these is under what's known as a consent decree to fix them. So don't complain too much if your utility rates from the sewer district have gone up. On our back, we've had to fund a $3 billion stormwater separation. To your point, yeah, absolutely. Those are a little more controlled. So what we're interested in that is within the pipes, how we can smarten up the system. So here's a good example of a company we're working with. They're called Subterra AI. And what they work on is these floating pipe inspection systems where they can use both sonar as well as high definition 3D cameras. And we can use that to actually inspect those pipes, inspect those systems at a rate that's about 10 to 1 over current technology. And the idea then is also getting into advanced analytics. This data is just flowing right into machine learning so that if there's something spotted, the computer's going to spot it before the human, and then we can go in there and actually do a visual inspection. So that would be one example.
Yeah, I was just thinking like with the buoy system and that, and now with like say the combined storm sewer overflow tunnels, the storage tanks that are being used,
Yep.
All of that with the buoy system that you already currently have. I was wondering if maybe we'd be able to see or map how things are working, because as those get implemented, then you should be able to see numbers going down, right, versus where they are right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and we've been working with the sewer district on that. And those buoys are out on the lake, but that equipment in them, those sondes, are also at various outflows within the sewer district system. Yeah.
The $2 million investment from NOAA, was that an Erie Hack project finalist, or was that a separate endeavor?
That was a separate endeavor. That was us, a company called Limnotech, and the Great Lakes Observing System. And I should put a plug in. Has anybody here heard of Great Lakes Observing System? So that's intriguing. GLOS, as we call it, is kind of in charge of these observation systems for all the Great Lakes. There's something like 13 observing systems. There's only one for freshwater and one for the Great Lakes. So they are a affiliate, but not a government agency. So they were really key in coming to us saying, we love all this technology, we love all this innovation. Why don't you, Cleveland Water Alliance, come in and do 2 or 3 things for us on this? The first was manage. They're scientists, they don't manage people and programs super well, so we're like, yeah, we can do that. The second was to look at, introduce us to equipment, technology, and innovation that we should be looking at for this, serve as our gatekeeper for this, so we've done that. And the third piece is, develop a sustainable funding model. We can't rely on NOAA always putting those dollars in. So to answer your question, yes and no. Indirectly, absolutely.
I don't know a lot about smart cities, so this might be a very naive question, but it seems to me that the future that you're painting is going to require a different kind of graduate coming out of schools. So what are you seeing as the new competencies, the new capabilities that young professionals are needing?
Blue STEM. That's what we call it. We have a partnership in San Diego with the Maritime Alliance. They're a lot like us, but they concentrate more on the salt components of it. And they wrote a really small, modest grant to the Department of Education and Department of Labor to try something called Blue STEM at their community college. And that was a year and a half ago. It took off so quickly that the San Diego school system, which is the entire county there, last November had a $1 billion bond initiative, and within that $1 billion, they said, let's take this whole Blue STEM component and put it into a high school as well. So the bond passed, and now they're doing that. But when you think of STEM, think of Blue STEM. And we're trying to figure out how we could potentially do something like that here. We're in discussions with the Foundry, as kind of being our lead partner in terms of the Blue STEM. But it's those skills, but not exclusively, meaning somebody can go and get an associate's degree to understand, that they're going to be running that little drone I talked about in the pipes with a little tablet. You don't necessarily need a 4-year degree for that. So we're really intrigued by those positions all the way up through coders. Anything that was coming out of Silicon Valley, then went to Austin, a little bit went to Ann Arbor, some have gone to Columbus. We need to build that community out here. That's what my companies need, are those that have those skills, as well as kind of research, innovation, and technology. Everybody that I work with now has an R&D lab, within their facility, whether that's an OD, whether that's a Connecticut. Workforce is a huge challenge for them. That being said, we're going to do a workforce panel, I think it's in September with Case Western, on this very topic. So we're bringing in Connecticut, we're bringing in OD, we're bringing in a couple others to talk about what their needs will be from the spectrum. Yes?
Can you comment on your earlier inference about the H2O proposal in the budget? You indicated some concern. Could you articulate those?
Yeah, so let me do the macro concern and then our concerns. So the macro concerns have always been transparency. My opinion is this has been a little bit rushed, maybe not all stakeholder engagement. Let's say the government relations folks in Columbus right now are eating well. There's a lot of money at play from that standpoint. So we make the following recommendations to Governor DeWine. There must and has to be a monitoring component to it. And it must include best available technology, which includes real-time monitoring. By doing so, we are going to be able to, one, find out, is this having an impact? Are we seeing those goals, that 40% reduction goal, actually reducing? Two, it will allow us to prioritize in terms of where those dollars should be spent. Those management actions, as an example. So ultimately what we're talking about here is ROI, return on investment. This is public dollars. I think we can be extremely impactful with these dollars if done correctly. But if we just say, there's 3 agencies that are getting the money, ODNR, OEPA, and ODA. If we just give them basically a bucket of money and just say, go figure it out, we might figure it out, but I think it's going to take a little while. And I think we can do it much faster through what we've suggested, which is get into monitoring, make it as transparent as possible. Let's admit we will make some mistakes, but this is a learning process. But as long as we have that feedback loop system, I think we're going to do okay. So that's where we're spending our energy and time in terms of Governor DeWine right now. All right, thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for having me come, and thank you all for coming today. It's very important for people to pick up and get some more information on what's going out in the lake. it's a big deal for coming out for the year here in Cleveland. It's going to be a really, really big deal. And good luck with all of the festivities that you have. And hopefully Mother Nature will roll along with you too. She's had a tough start here, I'll tell you that. Here's a buoy that you probably have not seen. Has anybody seen it? You guys are too far to the east. This is the buoy that the Coast Guard put out in 2013, and this depicts the Battle of Lake Erie. This is out in the middle of nowhere, basically. It's about 4 miles northeast of West Sister Island, which is the westernmost island in the lake, obviously over in the western basin. This was Labor Day weekend in 2013. One of the things that we all talk about is the dollars that is generated by people coming for various things for Lake Erie. This was one of them. That weekend, there was 100,000 people went through Putin Bay. 100,000. Every room, every dock, everything was booked a year ahead of time. They had 14 of the tall ships, and they went out and reenacted the battle. There was over 3,000 pleasure craft all around it. It was a zoo out there, really. It was a mess to try to maneuver around. But it brought that many people to a very, very small island. And of course, everyone has to go through Fort Clinton. So all of those people were going back and forth on the ferries. Fortunately, that day, there was 2 and 3 foot waves. And the algae was there, but unless you really know what you're looking for, you won't see it. It was there. But it was good because a lot of people did not see what was going on. Well, unfortunately, the next day, September the 3rd, in Carroll Township in Ottawa County, I live there, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we get a call from our water treatment guys and say, please do not drink your water. Now, I don't know if anyone's ever had that happen to you, but I tell you, that is a shock. A lot of different feelings go by, but you really get upset at the end. How can something like that happen this day and age? Unfortunately, it didn't create enough of a stir. There was only 2,000 people associated with that particular water treatment facility. It's a very small location there. But it's also one of the newer ones. It had basically most of the bells and whistles that the facilities do have. But it got overwhelmed by the algae came in with the intake, and it was way over where the numbers were. Fortunately, the people in the Western Basin, all of the water intake guys were actually testing. They were not required to do that, but we sure were glad that they did, because it went way over where, at that point in time, World Health Organization had the definitions out, and this was way over. Fortunately, that facility was tied in with the facility in Fort Clinton, so by moving some valving around, they were able to get some clean water quickly enough. But we still had, you know, the bottled water brigade came rolling in with the trucks, and it was the first thing in the state, first time in the state of Ohio that there was a do not drink going through to the state. But like I say, it did not have enough oomph, I guess, because of the small location, that it didn't get the attention that it should have. Obviously, a year later, we had Toledo, and that got international attention. But that's how quickly we can have a lot of money coming in, and then a lot of downtime, if you will, and people saying, wow, should I really go into Lake Erie and do these kind of things? I'm sure you've all heard, walleye capital of the world, we really are. I know there are other places that like to say that, the folks in Wisconsin, Minnesota. But if you come to the Western Basin right now and look around, you'll see Wisconsin license plates everywhere. They have closed seasons on walleye. Minnesota does also. We do not. We have fish all over the place. So we really are the walleye capital of the world. And as you see, it's a $1 billion industry just for the sport fishing. There's 20,000 jobs tied in with that. I'm one of those. I've been at it for quite a long time. I actually started fishing the lake back in the 70s. So I saw the bad, the good, and now we're in the bad part again. We are actually the largest charter boat fleet in North America, and it's all up and down the coast of Lake Erie. It is also the most valuable freshwater commercial fishery in the world. Now this includes our friends across the border in Canada. Obviously, walleye is a sport fish in Ohio, so we do not take that as a commercial fish in Ohio. But when you get walleye in the store or in the restaurant, it comes from Lake Erie, but it comes from the Canadian commercial system up there. They have a huge, huge commercial system there. Sports and Field put us as the top best fishery in the world, and not only for our walleye, but it also covers bass too, and especially smallmouth bass. These are the kind of numbers that we like to throw out to make sure people understand what it means to react to Lake Erie. 16.1 billion. Now this is the impact coming into the state from tourism. And this applies to just the 8 counties that are along the side of Lake Erie, just those 8 counties. You know, that's almost 128,000 full-time jobs and an awful lot of taxes coming in. Now again, like I say, this is the 8 counties. That's a third, a little over a third of the entire monies coming in from the state for the rest of Ohio's tourism. And tourism is the 3rd largest industry in the state. So you can see what happens if people decide, I don't want to go to Cedar Point, I don't want to go to Clinton Bay, I don't want to go to a beach, I don't want to go sailing, whatever they want to do along the lake. It's a huge, huge dip into a lot of people's industries. Again, I'll put walleye capital of the world. How many have gone to Port Clinton for the walleye drop? Probably nobody. But believe it or not, you know, it's in December, January, February in Port Clinton. It's a sleepy, sleepy town. Not much is going on there. Half of the place is shut down. But for the walleye drop, there's 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 people show up for this. So it's a shot in the arm for some businesses that are there during an extremely quiet time. I mean, it's been on a lot of the national news too. Everybody's got their thing for New Year's Eve, but this is ours. And it's been going on for well over 20-some years now. But the thing is, again, talking about dollars coming in when people show up. Ottawa County, if you would track and look at Ottawa County and look at unemployment numbers in December, January, February, most of the time that county is either the leader or very close as the most unemployment, usually 8+%, 8, 9, sometimes 10%. Right now, when we're back into season, it's down to 4.5, 5, where everyone else is. So it makes that much of a difference based on what happens with the people coming in for whatever they want to see to Lake Erie. Half of the hotels are closed, a third of the restaurants are closed because there's not enough business there to justify keeping going. But they make up for it in the summertime when all these people are coming in. And the county, it goes from about a 45,000 population to 250,000 population. That's the difference in Ottawa County and people that are coming in. Ottawa County sells more fishing licenses than any other place in Ohio. There are more registered boats per capita than any other place in Ohio, including Cleveland. So it's one of those where there's a lot of business in and out in that little area there. One other thing that sometimes happens, not always, this is 2014-15. This is the ice fishing season in the lake, which we may or may not get. We haven't had a good one since then. This is out in Putin Bay, and there's a huge amount of people going out there. Obviously, we have to go other ways other than driving the ferry system because they won't run. You have to fly out or you go by the air sleds. And it's a huge, huge attraction because it's a walleye factory out there again. And that's when we get the really, really big ones. So there's a lot of interest in going out there. Usually in the wintertime, there's one bar and there's one gas station there. There were so many people coming out there with all the equipment that they just about ran out of gas. Worse yet, they almost ran out of beer. So one of those sleds had to make runs back and forth to the mainland and bring in beer and gas. So it doesn't happen every season just because of nature. You know, sometimes we don't have the ice. We haven't had it for quite a while. But since we can fish year-round, it's a big deal for a lot of people showing up. I'm sure you've seen lots and lots of pictures like this. This is the enhanced version. This is 2015, which at this point in time is the worst one that we've ever had as far as balloon intensity, coverage, in any way you want to look at it. We had pretty much shut down our business from the end of July. We did not run August, September, and most of October. We took a 25% hit on our business because either people were supposed to come out and cancel their charters, or we actually canceled it for ourselves when people asked to go out because we could not find any place to go that we could get out of that big balloon. The only place we could get up there was a corner up there towards Detroit, which puts us 25, 30 miles away from our ports, which means that the people are going to spend half of the trip boat riding rather than fishing. And people get upset if they came out to go fishing and all we're doing is running out, running back. Plus you're running through all that, which is very, very ugly. How many people have been out in something like that? A couple of people have. Disgusting is a nice polite term, I guess. There's a lot of other ones. When it gets as thick as that, and our boats are actually slowing down when we run through that, it'll actually scrub the boat speed. You have a different feel in the boat. And of course the other part of it is it smells. So between the visual and the smell part, that's the reason we actually were canceling our own trips if people wanted to go out. It's one of those things that you just don't want to have things going out into that area. At one point, the 2 or 3 days later after this particular satellite picture was there, we could have run from the South Shore to the North Shore and never get out of that greenality. It was thick from one shore to the other shore. It was an unbelievable event out there. We thought that back in 2011, which it came all the way down here, we thought that was the worst. Well, that year it outdid itself. And it's one of the things that it seems like it's just always there now. And other than 2012, which was a drought year, we've had it every year. So every year, our business gets tore apart in the later part of the season. And of course, we are a seasonal business. You know, we start in April, we stop at the end of October. And there's no way for us to make up that money that we lose. But it's not just us. We've got, within our marina, we've got a family that their business is cleaning fish. That's all they do. That's where their income comes from. They'll come down to our boats when we come in, pick up the fish, clean them, and then our clients go and pick them up. Obviously, if we don't go out, they don't have any fish to clean. And they have no other means of getting income from those folks. It's, you know, $15,000, $20,000 lost during that time frame. Doesn't seem like a lot of money, but to those folks, that's a big pile of money because they're not going to make it up. There's no way to catch back up. Within side of the marina, of course, there's the fuel docks, which you all know they take the pricing way up. It's a gotcha thing, but there's no boats running, so nobody's buying gas. Back in the back end, there's a restaurant there. There's no one there to use the restaurant. So it's a mushroom effect going around to all the areas. And even if it's people that aren't fishing or have a boat, but they want to go to Put-in-Bay, or they want to go to Cedar Point. Fortunately, Cedar Point is, with the angle that it is, most of the time it misses that. But if you go all the way around the area, you'll see this issue there. It's one of those things where if you can't see it, it makes a big difference. And a lot of people now have gotten used to looking at the satellite images. So they know where to look at it, and they know what it's looking like. And now we know that people are looking at, I'm not going to go to Lake Erie for our summer vacation. I'm going to go pick someplace else because I don't want to deal with that. But in a lot of cases, if you look at that image again, once you get east of that pile of ugly looking things there, there's nothing else beyond that. So there's an awful lot of lake left that's clean and clear, and you can go there and other things to do. The other thing too, I would recommend too, if you're not used to looking at it from this angle and this image, the other image that comes off of Modus will only show you one that shows either green or brown image, and that's the sediment or algae, but you can't really tell if it's the bad algae or not. This is the enhanced version. The brighter and oranger or redder it gets, the more intense it is. So if you get to the colored image, now you know for sure that you're looking at the bad algae and not just algae, because it'll show up at times, especially in the western basin, where it does have a greenish color to it. But that's the good algae, and we don't want to lose that. We need that for our food base, for the fish. I always show this to any of my presentations, and I do have some extra copies if you're interested in having one. Take a look at this. This is the toxicity levels of a lot of various things that you'll recognize. Cyanide's in there. It's kind of towards the bottom down there. But the toxin we're dealing with is a bad, bad actor. If you look clear up at the top, the very top version is dioxin. The very next one down is microcystin. Now, there are a lot of versions of this. This one says LR on it. That's the one that's most studied anyway. Saxitoxin is the next one. That's a war estimate. That's a bad thing there. And there's another one further down. It's very hard to pronounce. I won't even try it. But the ones in red there are other things that have come off of this toxin. Unfortunately, and there was a question about education down the road in some of the areas where we need help. We don't know a lot of things about the toxins. Like I said, that's LR. There's over 100 different versions of that toxin. and we don't know very much about any of them, even though this stuff has been around millions of years. So we're kind of behind the 8 ball from the medical world. We don't know a lot of things about this. We don't know about how the body reacts to it. We start getting concerned because we start coughing later in the season. We're running back and forth. Our boats, because of our speeds, can inspirate the stuff off the top of the water. Is that good or bad? There's no way to tell right now if you have a problem based on the toxins that we're looking at. So the medical world is behind, and we need help in that area to learn what's going on. The other part of it is sometimes you have a huge bloom, very low toxins. In Toledo's example, there was not the biggest of blooms, but it was all wrapped around Toledo's intake. It got plowed in there with the winds, and it stayed put. And it eventually pushed it right down to the bottom where the end of the pipes are for the intake. If you would have gone 25 miles away from that intake, the water was crystal clear, good stuff. But it got pushed in there because this stuff floats, and it's subject to whatever winds we have. So you have a little bloom, but a lot of toxin. And it's still not nailed down as to exactly why that happens. But part of it is nitrogen. That's a big part of it. We're learning that slowly but surely, but it's not just phosphorus. Nitrogen is a big part of it. I know Ryan talked about this quite a bit, so I won't take a whole lot of time here. You know about your sensors going out across your intakes. The smaller picture on the other side is the dead zone. And the dead zone has always been there, even way, way back when. But it's growing and growing kind of at the pace that our blooms are going. And in some cases, a third of the lake has the dead zone underneath it. Now, we don't get that down in the Western Basin because our water's too shallow. So it'll start over here any place that you're at least 50, 60 feet deep. A thermocline happens out in the water in the summertime, and it won't start till at least 50 foot down. But what you get is a temperature differential with the temperature below it and above it, and it can't mix anymore. The densities are just different enough that you can't get a mix going on. So everything that's underneath that thermocline is getting the oxygen pulled out by decaying stuff that's under the bottom of the lake. The primary stuff is this algae. So the more we push down from the Western Basin, goes in, stops at the bottom of the Central Basin, and that dead zone gets bigger and bigger. The upwells here is where the big issue will come from here in Cleveland with your water intakes. And it's one of those things that can happen with the water rolling from underneath it there. The other part of it is how it affects our fish. With the way the lake is, very shallow on one end, very deep in the other end, we have a different fishery way down at the eastern end. Water's deeper and colder. Ours is warmer and much, much shallower. So from the Western Basin and the Central Basin, the primary fish are walleye, yellow perch, smallmouth bass. You go to the eastern end, it's trout, burbot, that kind of stuff. There's these numbers here are what the fish would prefer to have if they have the chance. And we're looking at 10 to 20 parts per billion. And this is phosphorus. This is the concentration in the water. The other side of the lake is only 5 to 10. In 2011, that parts per million was 1,200. On 2015's bloom, that jumped to 3,000 parts per million. So what is the concern from the biologist standpoint of the fishery is these fish try to get away from this stuff if possible with the high concentrations of phosphorus. But eventually, you might reach a point where there's no place else for them to go. And I'll talk about some telemetry studies here in a little bit, but they'll actually leave. What we do is now we'll have a replacement of fish that you really don't want to catch. White perch, sheephead, catfish, those kind of things. Not that they're bad, but I guarantee you I could not get a client to come out and say, let's go sheephead fishing. That's not going to happen. And sorry about this, I didn't get a chance to check this out, and boy, I can't hardly read it from here. The way to think about this, though, is where the problem is coming from in Lake Erie. This is the source of the phosphorus, okay? The one on the left is phosphorus, the other side is nitrogen. And this is coming, if you look at the pie chart, just think about it as the brown, dark brown area. The light blue and stuff, those are water treatment, sewage treatment facilities, those kind of things. There are obviously some nutrients coming off of those, but that's a very, very small percentage. The one on the left is 87% of the phosphorus. This side is 89% of the nitrogen is coming off of the land. It's all coming from the farm systems. So that's where we have to do an awful lot of work. Because if we don't ever change this, we're not going to fix it. And again, this is another one I didn't get a chance to check, but the Maumee River is the largest water system in the Great Lakes, not just Ohio, but in the Great Lakes. There's 4.5 million acres of farmland rolling through into the western basin coming from the Maumee River. And that is the water system right there. All of those dots in there are places where there are monitors. And when you see the ones with the red in there, those are way, way over where they are for total phosphorus, dissolved reactive phosphorus, and nitrogen. So that's where we need to do the concentration. And there was a question earlier about the H2O Ohio monies coming down. This is where it has to be concentrated, but without having more monitors and more looking at what we did, what happened before, during, and after, we're going to be blowing a lot of money again. Because that's what's happened in the state of Ohio in the past. We've been well over $3 billion already looking at these kind of things, and obviously we haven't done anything to fix the problem. So if and when they get this, I know right now I guess they've got it through the House.
Right.
So it's now to the Senate, and it has to get done by the end of June. So you'll see the numbers bounce back and forth. But anything that anyone does out there with any of these monies, we need to have the accountability of what we did, how we did it, and even if it's something that we tried and it didn't work, at least we learned something. Because before, all we've done is thrown the money out, and we can't track it, we can't follow it, we don't know if it works or not. We've got a lot of things that are called BMPs, best management practices, that personally I don't think they are, because no one can verify that it really is. So until I see something, then let's do that, or let's maybe don't do that. But this is the area that we'll have to deal with.